Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast series. Our show is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest app, which allows innkeepers to provide guests with their recommendations of the best local places to eat, play, and shop during their stay. The Frictionless Guest app is accessible through all mobile and desktop devices, and you can learn more about it by visiting frictionlessguest.com. Once again, that's frictionlessguest.com. I'm Matt Langen, and I'll be joined by Steve Short, the founder and CEO of the Frictionless Guest app. And in part one of a two-part podcast series, we are speaking with Monique Greenwood, who is the owner of the Akwaaba Bed and Breakfast Inns. She's also the former editor-in-chief of Essence Magazine and the star of OWN TV's Checked In reality show. For this episode, Monique will be discussing her overall background as well as her insights into being an owner of multiple B&B properties and much more. And Monique and Steve, how you both doing today?
I am terrific. Thank you guys for having me.
Awesome. Great to have you. Steve, how you doing?
Doing great. And Monique, thanks a lot for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is definitely an exciting one for us. So, Monique, let's start at the top. If you don't mind, tell us about your background and how you came about to be an innkeeper.
Well, my professional background is as a journalist. I graduated Howard University with a degree in print journalism and a minor in fashion, and I always wanted to be a fashion editor, and then more specifically, editor-in-chief of Essence Magazine. So I feel really blessed that I was able to accomplish that goal. And then I made the transition and I gave up my pen for a spatula and became an innkeeper. And that happened in 1995. And guys, the way that kind of came about was I had started to stay at a couple of B&Bs, and the more I stayed at them, the more I realized that they tied into my personal passions. I love entertaining, decorating, creating wonderful experiences, and I believe that real estate is the best financial investment you can make. So all of those things came together with being an inn owner.
That's great. If you don't mind, tell us about the Akwaaba properties you have and kind of your strategy for having these properties for all seasons of the year.
Sure. So Akwaaba is the name of my bed and breakfast inns. It means welcome in Ghana, West Africa. The very first one was is in Brooklyn, New York, and that's the one that we started in 1995. I'm also in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Cape May, New Jersey, and the Poconos Mountains in Pennsylvania. And my strategy behind it was basically believing that one's business plan has to be in sync with one's life plan. And for me, I had this audacious goal of owning a home that I love in a city that I love for each season of the year. And it would be audacious really for anybody, but especially for me because I was raised very modestly in a family of 7. And I never even slept in a bed by myself until I was 22 because it was always my sister sleeping next to me. And we were both queen size, sleeping in a full-size bed. And so the thought that I could go from that to actually owning these historic mansions and running them as bed and breakfast inns was definitely a bodacious goal. And I feel incredibly blessed to have made that happen. It was able to happen basically because of the first acquisition. The bed and breakfast in Brooklyn is in a historic mansion at about 5,000 square feet, and we sit on a really large lot, which is rare in New York. And at the time that I came across this property, all the kids in the neighborhood called it the haunted house. And my husband and I were living a couple of blocks away, and I would drive by this house every day and probably didn't see it for several years until one day I was driving down the block and the house across the street, which is also a distinct property like this one, they were having a wedding and people were spilling out into the lawn, drinking champagne, looking beautiful. And at that time, I stopped my car and I marveled at it. It was just a beautiful sight. And then I realized that the galvanized trash cans that they used for their household trash were across the front of the property and was going to be in every single picture. And at that time, I was fashion editor and I couldn't help myself. I jumped out the car and ran over there, moved the trash can, styled the photos, and, spent an hour over there making sure that they had gorgeous pictures. And as I walked back across the street to my car, that's when I saw the mansion that I now own, with different eyes. And clearly, everyone looked at me like I had 3 eyes when I said I wanted to turn that dilapidated mansion into a luxury bed and breakfast. And I always say that I do have 3 eyes, and I believe all entrepreneurs do. But that third eye is the eye of vision. It's the ability to see the possibility. And so I purchased that building. My husband and I, we moved from our house and moved into the mansion. And our daughter was 3 at the time. And we started to convert this property into a B&B. So my daughter's now 27, and she grew up in the inn, always learning how to use her inside voice from a very young age. And because of that purchase, which was, believe it or not, and people who are from New York, their mouths are going to be open wide when I say this, we only paid $225,000 for this 5,000 square foot mansion. And of course, we had to put a lot more money into it to restore it. But now the property is worth about $8 million. And because of that increase in value and the buildup of the equity of the property, we've been able to pull that money out and then purchase the additional ends that we have. And so that's pretty much how we finance this dream of a home in the city for each season of the year. The Poconos was not my plan for the winter. I had New York for the fall, D.C. for the spring, Cape May for the summer, and New Orleans was actually the goal for the winter. And we did operate a bed and breakfast in New Orleans for a very short time because we opened July 4th, and that's the day that we opened all of our inns as a declaration of our own independence. And so we opened in New Orleans July 4th, and a month later, an unexpected guest without a reservation showed up, and her name was Katrina. And at that moment, I had to test myself and see whether or not I could turn lemons, not into lemonade, but into lemon meringue pie. And I was able to do that because I thought long and hard about who needed to be in New Orleans at that particular time. And I realized it was insurance adjusters that needed to be there because they had so many claims. They need to come and meet with their insureds and find out what needed to happen to get folks back into their homes. And so I called all the insurance companies I could think of, and we housed insurance agents for almost a year. We also had a contract with FEMA where we housed evacuees, and that got us through for a minute. But then after the city made a comeback, it was too slow for the business to make a comeback, and we ultimately sold that property and then found ourselves in the Poconos, which is not where I want to be in the winter because I don't ski and I don't really like the cold weather. So, but I do find myself in the Poconos almost every weekend because that is now our largest property. I really call it a boutique resort because it has just about everything anybody would ever need while they're on vacation. We do have a 7-room spa. We have a huge gym, Olympic-sized in-ground heated pool, tennis courts, walking paths, and we sit on 22 acres of land. And I know this has been one long run-on sentence that I've given you, but that particular property is especially significant for me. I consider it to be the jewel in the crown of Akwaaba Bed and Breakfast Inns because it is a former Woolworth estate. And I always have to stop and take a breath when I say that. And I have to be reminded of the fact that as an African-American woman, my grandmother was not allowed to sit at the counter at Woolworths during segregation. And then I just think about the fact that now I, a Black woman, that many years later, not too many years later, own their property. And it just speaks again to the possibilities when you're willing to do the work and you have a vision and a dream and you're just determined to make it happen. And so we're excited that we've been in the Poconos now for the last 7 years.
Wow, that's what a great rundown. Go ahead, Steve. I was going to pass the baton on to you. I'm sure you have some great follow-on questions.
Well, I know even though I haven't gotten through all of the Checked-In series, I know that when you were talking to your daughter, Glenn, she with a Y, right? Your husband, Glenn, is with the E. Is that right?
That's correct. Absolutely.
But you were talking about the desire to pass things on to her and the legacy, and you talked about your grandmother and the whole Woolworths thing and the segregation and all of that. And yeah, when you were talking about, I guess, growing up in D.C., and I didn't realize you were one of 7. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your journey has just been unbelievable in terms of, and I feel the same way about myself. I wasn't, I was one of 3 kids. I wasn't one of 7 and sharing a bed, maybe sharing a bedroom sometimes. But anyway, I kind of see that perspective. You've got to look back now and say, wow, you don't seem like the type of person that looks back. But anyway, go back to like 95, you buy this place and fix it up, buy I guess what you call Akwaaba mansion in Brooklyn, the first one. But you were still, like, you became the managing editor of Essence magazine in like 2000. So you were living the corporate life as well as trying to fix up this place and then eventually turning it into a bed and breakfast. What was that like early off? I mean, not that you're working any less now, but tell us about that, especially with the young daughter and all that.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely loved my job as editor-in-chief of Essence magazine. Essence is the leading publication for African American women in the country. I'm not sure what its readership is now, but at the time that I was there, it was close to 2 million people read the magazine every month. So it was a big job, and it was the one that I always wanted to have since I was a teenager. Essence was always on the coffee table in my family home, and it was the magazine that did portray me beautiful as a Black woman. And at the time when I decided to do the bed and breakfast, I was really convinced that I was able to do them both. I felt like, most of my guests would come on the weekends when I would be off. Early on, I learned to pre-qualify the caller when they called in for a reservation. I would ask them what was bringing them to our neck of the woods. And if they were coming on a Monday through Friday and told me that they were coming for business, that was a great guest for me because they would have the same kind of schedule I would have. I could go make some eggs, and then I could go make a magazine, and then I could come home and make them happy at the end of the day. So that worked. If they told me they were coming for an anniversary or a birthday or anything like that during the week, I would just simply say, oh, I'm so sorry, we are fully booked, even though we weren't. And I would say that because I knew that I couldn't give them the kind of high-touch experience that I set out to offer from day one. But what it turned out to be was an unintentional marketing ploy because then people would start saying, oh, my goodness, you can never get in there. They're always booked. And that wasn't such a bad thing for people to feel that way because folks always want what they can't have. And so the word of mouth started getting out very quickly that we were always booked and they just had to get in here. So in the beginning, it was a struggle to do both, but that's kind of how we did it, mostly on the weekends, my husband and I both. My husband then came home from working his 9 to 5 as a broadcast engineer to be the primary caregiver of our daughter because I was totally consumed with running this magazine. It required some travel and just a lot of brain power and stress related to those deadlines as well. So when he came home to be the primary caregiver for our daughter, we then were able to take guests during the week because he was able to service them. And that worked really well until I decided that I wanted to open the one in Cape, which was in number 2. And that was okay, too, because it was basically in the summer, and I went down and I worked that location in the summer, and that's when I decided to leave Essence when I opened the second location because it was no longer possible to do both. I just felt like at the time it was a tough decision, but, I couldn't do both well and then find room for me. I had a very, very long list of things to do, and I never showed up on it. So I just felt like I was living my life a little too fast and not really having a life. At the time, I was writing a book as well called Having What Matters. And I felt very hypocritical because I didn't feel like I had what mattered in my own life at that moment. And I was in Cape May when I came to that realization, and I was able to just silence the external noise and turn off the phone and turn off the beepers. They were out at that time, and really listen to my own voice. And I heard that voice say to me that it was time to leave Essence. And I tried to, silence that because I didn't want to hear that. I loved my job, and I was making a great salary and meeting wonderful people and having great influence and impact with the magazine on a community that I'm passionate about. So, but I listened to my voice, and I realized that something had to give if I were going to kind of save myself. And I understood that, if you're an editor, you know that you can't tell the whole story. You got to find the most significant parts. And I had to figure out what was going to be the lead in my life. And so I made the critical and difficult decision to leave the magazine and to go ahead and focus on the bed and breakfast and this goal of having multiple locations. And once I made that decision, again, there were people who thought I was crazy. Girlfriends said, Black women especially would kill to have that job as editor-in-chief of Essence. And I said, well, I'm not going to die to have it. And so I know when I told my daughter, she had the most unusual reaction. She was probably 8 at the time, and she looked horrified, and she said, how are we going to have food on the table and a roof over our heads? And, I chuckled a bit, but I realized that what she had done was to hit the playback button, because that's what I would always say to her every time I was the only mommy who couldn't go on the class trip, or I was running late to make it to the school play, or all of that stress in the life that I was living. And so she understood what I was saying to her, and she echoed it back to me, but I had to reassure her that not only would we have food on the table, but for a change, we will sit down and we will eat it together. And I just saw how excited that made her, and it made me realize that I had made the right decision. And that decision really came down to this. I am all about legacy building. And I knew that at the end of the day, I could not leave a job for my daughter, but I could leave her this business to run if she so chooses to do it, and a portfolio of real estate. And that meant a lot to me. It also meant a lot to me that I could actually help transform communities, because I ran a bed and breakfast in that location. And so those were the factors that really led me to leave the 9-to-5 and really focus on growing the bed and breakfast business. It was really all about legacy and what I wanted my legacy, my personal legacy, to be.
So you mentioned having what matters, the Black Woman's Guide to Creating a Life You Really Want. Tell us about that a little bit, and I guess more so, looking back in the rearview mirror now, 18 years after you wrote it, what's your perspective with what you wrote and how things transpired, and whether you feel like, you have gotten what you really want?
Well, like I said, when I set out to write the book, I was actually asked to write the book, and I had that platform of Essence, and so they wanted me to write basically a revised version of Helen Gurley Brown's book called Having It All. Helen Gurley Brown is the legendary editor-in-chief of Cosmo, and that was a very, very popular book. And so they wanted me to kind of revise that for Black women, and I was so stuck trying to do that initially until I took that trip to a bed and breakfast in Cape May and heard my own voice. And the words just started flowing once I made the decision that I was going to leave Essence and really work on my own business and work on my own self. And so I decided that the title of the book was going to be called Having What Matters, because I realized that I don't believe you can have it all, and I know for sure there's a lot I don't want. So I don't want to have it all. I just want what matters. And so when I wrote the book, I looked at those things that universally we all aspire to, whether it be healthy bodies, loving relationships, a way to leave the world a better place, financial freedom, a career that honors you, and all of these things I wanted to offer somewhat of a blueprint for. And I'm very transparent in the book, as I believe I am in my life, and showing examples of, what I have had to do to achieve those things, and to be clear about how I define success on my own terms. And so that's what the book looks at. And if I were to look back on my own personal life from the time I wrote the book to now, I believe that I'm living every line in it. It's not always, you're going to always have challenges, but when you're clear about, what your mission is, or just if you're centered in what matters to you, I believe that you'll always make the right decision at the end of the day. And so I never say no, and I never say never, but I am really clear, and I know how to say no to those things that drain me so that I can say yes to those things that fuel me. And that's pretty much how I live my life every single day.
Excellent. So now, where do you see things going with Akwaaba? Do you have, obviously you got your hands full with the Poconos thing. That's just an unbelievable property. What is it? I remember hearing it's like 12,000 square feet, or is that low? I don't know.
No, the mansion itself is 25,000 square feet. And then there's a 10,000 square foot, 25,000 square feet, And then there's a 10,000 square foot recreational facility and 22 acres of land. So that does keep me extremely busy. But, since that time I opened the one in Philadelphia, it's only a year old. And I'm excited about being in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection it has been a warm welcome there, and I'm very excited about what I believe we can do in that market. So, listen, I have 5 locations. They're only 4 seasons. So I've already reneged on what I promised my husband, just one for every season. So
there we go.
I don't anticipate that I would have additional locations that I would own and operate, because I am very hands-on, and I'm literally in my pickup truck up and down 95 every single week. I'm typically in 3 cities in 1 week. And so I don't see myself being able to give myself fully to another location. However, I think that the brand has lots of legs, and I have been doing these aspiring innkeeper workshops and coming across lots of amazing people who are interested in this industry. And so perhaps there's some kind of a nuanced franchise model that might happen. But for right now, I am much more focused on just maintaining the level of excellence that we try to deliver with the existing properties we have. And I'd also like to see if we can extend our brand to a line of home decor, because I personally decorate each of the ends, and I get a lot of pleasure out of that. And I'd like to see a line of Akwaaba home products. Right now, I'm going to launch just before the holidays a Akwaaba shop website where folks can buy online, just to an e-commerce site, all of the many things that I've used to decorate and punctuate the spaces within the ends. And so everything I use, I want to sell, and everything I sell, I want to use. And so this line extension in a small way will happen with the Akwaaba shop online, and then perhaps in a bigger way if we figure out how to partner with some manufacturers that might be interested in a licensing agreement, or we'll just have to see how that develops. But that's something I'd like to see. I think what's going to be really critical is to continue to cultivate an amazing team to move us forward, to buy into the vision, and because I'm clear that I can't do it by myself. And while I really, really, really still pray and hope my daughter will consider joining the family business, right now I'm kind of losing that that fight. That was one of the biggest storylines in our reality show Checked In, was whether or not my daughter would take over the family business. And I have to tell you, just through all the social media around the television show, it was pretty equally split, with half the viewers feeling like she should take over the family business, and, understanding, especially within the Black community, that we end up many times starting from scratch. We don't create a generational wealth by having multi-generation businesses. Typically, it dies after one generation. It's outside of something like a funeral home and maybe a hair salon. We don't have generational wealth attained from businesses passing from one generation to the next. And so, I think that that's an unfortunate commentary, and I would love to see it change, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be the one to do it, because I only have one kid, so I have one shot at this. And she is just as passionate about being a writer as I am about, running these businesses. And so I'm not sure how that's going to shake out. Every day, though, I try to have her experience something with me. I just spoke at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. this past weekend, and I convinced her to come and join me, because we were talking about women and having a room of their own, basically women in the hospitality space. And, I can tell that when she hears me and others speak on that, and the reaction that people have and the inspiration that they gain, that, she gets a little lit up. And so, I try to expose her to that as much as I can. She's probably on to me at this point, but we'll see. I do hope that she will one day change her mind. She probably has to let the world beat her up a little bit in the corporate world, or even in the freelance world, and then she'll come to see how she can step into innkeeping and put her own spin on it. She doesn't have to do it like I do it. And when she realizes that, she might come along, because I know that she doesn't want the life that I live. She thinks I'm way too stretched. But I know where I draw the line, and we all draw the line in a different place. And so she doesn't want this pace that I live, but I know that she can do it in her own way, and we just have to convince her of that.
Yeah, and at one point in the series, she said something about, well, maybe I could do it, but not the way you do it, basically. So, and before we kind of jump into that, because I think, once we start talking about Checked In, we'll probably have a lot to talk about there as well. But just going back to talking about the decor and everything, talk a little bit about the inns. I mean, my impression is that you like kind of bright, sort of contemporary colors, but at the same time, like, for example, in Pocono's house, you got all this, raised paneling on the first floor, one of the big rooms where breakfast is, for example, and that was brown, just dark brown or whatever, and you painted that kind of a light sort
Tiffany
of
blue,
green. Yeah,
and beautiful Tiffany blue.
So at first, like, my wife and we're big, like, purists as far as, our historic home and how we had it restored and colors and all that stuff. So at first I thought, okay, well, she's kind of like this modernist that comes into a new space. But at the same time, later on, you talk about all original stuff. Like, it sounds to me like you're trying to preserve everything, but do it with your own sort of eye for color and design and all of that.
Really good observation. So what I really believe in is to preserve everything that is historical about the property, the architectural features of the property. But then I furnish everything in a more contemporary way. And I believe that the two can coexist beautifully. So I would never get rid of paneling or ceiling medallions or parquet wood floors or carved Italian marble fireplaces. These are the kinds of details that attracted me to the property. And they also are the details that, hit you in the pocket when you try to preserve them. But I do that. But when I decorate, I want things that are functional. I want things that feel easy and comfortable. I never want anyone to feel like they're staying in a museum or that something is so precious that they can't plop down on it or touch it or whatever. So that's kind of what I do. And then I like to typically have some kind of a design theme. It just makes it easier if I'm going into a blank space with just empty walls, like, where do I begin? So what I recently did at the Philadelphia location, which the property itself was built in 1890, so it has amazing detailed fireplaces in every room. It has cove ceilings. It has wood paneling, amazing light fixtures. But, I had all these rooms to design and decorate. So I decided to go with the theme of the sounds of Philadelphia, because so much of our modern day music comes out of Philadelphia. People like Patti LaBelle and Teddy Pendergrass, and more contemporary artists like Music Soul Child and Jill Scott, and some of the old crooners are all from Philadelphia. Such a rich musical legacy. So I decided to pay homage to that legacy. And so therefore, I now have album covers from those artists that line the plate rails throughout the property. And I let those artists and their music style or who they are kind of inform the design of that room. So there's a room, for example, that's called Swoon. And of course, I couldn't call it Teddy Pendergrass or anything like that because I'd have to pay royalties to do that. So Swoon is what I call a room that pays homage to all of those deep-throated crooners from Philadelphia. And because it's such a sexy sound, so is the room. So it's a smoke gray color, and there's black velvet curtains, and then there's a few antiques thrown in there, but then you have really great, beds, and it's just a combination in terms of where it's coming from. DC, the theme there is African American literature. And so there's a Toni Morrison room, there's a Langston Hughes room, and those rooms just take on the character of that, the persona of that author. So it's a lot of fun to be able to kind of do it that way.
So there's no Chuck Brown room in D.C.?
See, you know about Chuck Brown. My goodness, yes, go-go music. That is the music of Washington, D.C. No, because in D.C. we're playing with literacy. So we're playing with African-American literature. So, so no Chuck Brown in D.C. But, yes, I grew up with Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, and that was the music that, I partied to as a young girl.
You and many others, I'm sure. Some who I know. They said it was always a good time.
Yes.
Well, good. All right. Well, I guess you'd say that in terms, just finishing up on kind of the Akwaaba thing and style and all of that, would you say that anybody who stays in a Akwaaba property, that they're going to get, kind of luxury, but comfortable luxury with sort of a contemporary feel, at least in terms of how you make that place comfortable? Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. I mean, there's nothing pretentious about being here. So there's nothing pretentious in the breakfast that we serve or the way that we relate to our guests or the look of the inn. So we definitely wanted to feel very homey, and we want to create an intimacy is what we want to do. So anything that can help us create that is what we're going for.
Excellent. Okay.
Our guest for this episode of the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast series was Monique Greenwood, who is the owner of the Akwaaba Bed and Breakfast Inns. She's also the former editor-in-chief of Essence Magazine and is the star of OWN TV's Checked In reality show. And as you heard, Monique was kind enough to share more about her background as well as her insights into being an owner of multiple B&B properties. And be sure to stay tuned for the second part of this series where she discusses her OWN TV Checked In reality TV show as well as her philosophy behind enhancing the guest experience.